Imagine getting in massive trouble just for what was sitting on your bookshelf. Not for stealing it, not for writing it, just for owning the wrong pages. Across centuries of world history, certain books turned ordinary readers into fugitives, scribes into smugglers, and entire libraries into the world's most paranoid hiding spots. 44 absolutely wild stories of forbidden literature that powerful people genuinely believed could end civilization. Spoiler alert, the books usually won. 1. Roger Bacon, a 13th century English friar, got himself into hot water for reading and writing about subjects his fellow monks found deeply suspicious, like optics, alchemy, and experimental science. His superiors in the Franciscan order decided his curiosity was a problem and reportedly confined him while restricting access to his writings for years. The man's crime was essentially being too interested in how the world worked. He scribbled about lenses, gunpowder recipes, and mechanical devices centuries before anyone took them seriously. Later generations nicknamed him Dr. Mirabilis, the wonderful teacher. His own order, meanwhile, treated his notebooks like a fire hazard. Being curious was apparently a career-ending hobby. 2. Banned medieval texts found their most determined defenders in the copyists who refused to let ideas die quietly. Across Europe, whenever authorities ordered a controversial book suppressed, scribes in distant monasteries and quiet workshops would simply make new copies under different titles, swap author names, or hide passages inside larger, respectable-looking volumes. One forbidden treatise might resurface decades later, disguised as a totally innocent collection of sermons. It was the original game of literary hide-and-seek, played with quills and absolute patience. In a hilarious twist of fate, censors often had no idea the very book they banned was sitting right there in a library catalog, wearing a clever disguise and a fake mustache. 3. Giordano Bruno had a habit of writing books suggesting the universe was infinite, full of distant suns, and possibly home to other inhabited worlds. The Roman Inquisition was not in the mood for cosmic brainstorming. After 8 long years locked away while inquisitors annotated his writings like the world's grumpiest book club, Bruno was condemned in 1600. Some of his cosmic guesses were shockingly ahead of their time, but Rome punished the whole package as heresy, including theological ideas that had nothing to do with astronomy. His statue stands at Campo de' Fiori today, arms crossed, staring at the Vatican with what is arguably the most legendary side-eye in human history. 4. Chinese Emperor Qin Shi Huang attempted the most ambitious historical reboot ever in 213 BCE by ordering most existing books destroyed. Confucian philosophy, poetry collections, rival historical chronicles, all of it swept up in public destruction campaigns. Scholars who hid copies under floorboards faced severe punishment, and later sources claimed hundreds of them were punished, though modern historians argue endlessly over how literal those accounts really are. The point is, Qin wanted history to start with him as chapter 1. 2,000 years later, every Chinese schoolchild can quote Confucius. Qin's own writings? Not exactly trending on anyone's reading list. The reboot did not stick. 5. Anne Askew became one of the most famous Protestant voices of 1540s England because she refused to stop preaching from a translated Bible and refused to renounce her beliefs no matter how hard authorities pressured her. She was interrogated relentlessly inside the Tower of London in 1546, and the trial that followed made her a household name across Protestant Europe. What makes this story incredible is that Anne had secretly written her entire prison testimony, page by page, and friends smuggled it out of London. Her account became a runaway bestseller within years. Her testimony outlived the trial, the judges, and basically everyone who tried to silence her. Marketing genius, accidentally. 6. The Colloquies of Erasmus turned into one of the most stressful books to own in mid-16th century Spain. Erasmus had written witty satirical dialogues poking fun at corrupt monks, lazy priests, and over-the-top religious customs, and they became wildly popular before the Inquisition added them to the Index of Forbidden Literature. After 1559, Spanish readers caught with the Colloquies faced deeply stressful official visits, full property searches, public humiliation rituals, and the kind of formal interrogations nobody wanted scheduled. What makes this completely ridiculous is that the book was originally written as a textbook to teach schoolboys good Latin. Spain literally banned a Latin grammar exercise. The kids must have been thrilled. 7. Inquisitorial book hunts in southern France during the 1230s became one of the strangest house-cleaning operations in history. Officially appointed inquisitors traveled village to village armed with checklists of forbidden religious texts, and they personally rummaged through pantries, beneath beds, behind religious icons, and yes, even inside chicken coops, because apparently rural heretics loved hiding manuscripts near poultry. Entire families faced ruin if a single suspicious parchment turned up. Ironically enough, inquisitors kept incredibly detailed records of what they confiscated, and those records are now the main historical source for understanding the very forbidden books they tried to erase. Bureaucracy accidentally saved everything. 8. Lollard Bibles were the hottest underground reading material of late medieval England. Followers of John Wycliffe spent the early 1400s hand-copying English translations of scripture and circulating them through secret networks of weavers, merchants, and parish priests with very flexible morals. After the Constitutions of Oxford in 1408, owning a Lollard Bible became outright heresy, and readers caught with one-faced serious trials. Yet the authorities never managed to wipe them out. Hundreds of these hand-copied Bibles survive in libraries today, lovingly preserved by people who risked everything to keep reading them. Wycliffe's banned translation outlasted every official who swore to erase it. The bootleg edition simply refused to die. 9. English Bibles in the 1550s turned the entire country into the most paranoid book club ever assembled. Under Queen Mary I, owning a translated Protestant Bible meant living in constant fear that a neighbor might gossip, a servant might inform, or a visiting cousin might notice the wrong cover on your shelf. Families hid copies under floorboards, inside hollowed-out furniture, even behind brickwork. Reading aloud at home meant whispering. Quoting verses at the market meant disaster. The atmosphere of suspicion was so thick that some English households memorized passages instead of keeping pages, just to be safe. England spent 5 full years where having a translated Bible was the spiciest possible lifestyle choice. 10. Peter Olivi, a 13th-century Franciscan, wrote spiritual works so controversial that the church kept arguing about them for decades after he was gone. His writings about poverty and prophecy became wildly popular among a passionate group of friars, and authorities found the whole thing alarming. His books were investigated, condemned, and his followers were pressured to hand over every copy. In a strange turn of events, Olivi himself died peacefully, and only afterward did his writings become genuinely dangerous to own, sparking investigations that dragged on for years. The man caused more theological chaos as a memory than most authors manage while alive. His ideas refused to stay buried. 11. Christianismi Restitutio earned its place in history as one of the most dangerous theology books ever printed. Spanish physician Michael Servetus published it in 1553, casually questioning the Trinity, which back then was the absolute worst possible religious hot take available. Both Catholic and Protestant authorities wanted him gone. He fled to Geneva hoping John Calvin would be reasonable. Calvin was not reasonable. Geneva made an example of him, and the book became legendary because almost no copies survived. Only 3 originals are known to exist today, treated like crown jewels in rare book libraries. The text outlived everyone trying to silence it. Centuries later, Servetus's theological side hustle is finally getting some respect. 12. Tyndale's New Testament copies smuggled into England during the 1520s sparked one of the most aggressive customs operations in Tudor history. The books arrived hidden inside bales of cloth, flour sacks, wine barrels, and even sealed inside hollowed-out loaves of bread, because nothing screams clever like contraband sourdough. Bishop Cuthbert Tunstall got so frustrated he literally bought up entire shipments just to destroy them, accidentally funding Tyndale's next print run with church money. The man was running an unwitting Kickstarter for the very Bible he was trying to suppress. Readers caught distributing copies faced heresy trials, possibly the worst business decision in Tudor history. 13. Hidden Christians in Tokugawa, Japan, kept their faith alive without owning a single forbidden book on their shelves, which was the most genius workaround in religious history. After Christianity was banned in 1614, Japanese converts memorized prayers, catechism fragments, and biblical stories, then passed them down orally for over 200 years. They disguised devotional songs as Buddhist chants and hid tiny religious images inside ordinary statues. Anyone caught with smuggled Portuguese prayer books faced the dreaded fumii test and serious consequences, so they made their entire library invisible. By the 1860s, when Japan reopened, French missionaries were stunned to meet communities still whispering prayers their great-great-grandparents had memorized. 14. The Talmud trial of 1242 in Paris remains one of the strangest legal events in medieval history, because authorities put an actual book on trial like a criminal defendant. King Louis IX genuinely believed a sacred Jewish manuscript needed to defend itself in court, complete with prosecutors, witnesses, and formal accusations. Rabbis had to argue in defense of their own scripture in front of skeptical judges. The book lost, obviously, because it was a book. 24 cartloads of Talmud copies were confiscated and destroyed. Anyone caught hiding copies afterward faced ruinous fines and exile. A book got convicted in a courtroom. Medieval law was unhinged. 15. Books written by John Hus turned early 15th century Bohemia into a religious tinderbox. This Czech reformer wrote spicy theological works criticizing church corruption, and they spread across Central Europe like the world's fastest gossip column. In 1415, Hus was lured to the Council of Constance with a safe conduct promise that turned out to be worth approximately zero, and the council condemned him as a heretic. His books were ordered destroyed across Europe, and anyone caught with copies faced inquisitorial trials. Despite all these official efforts, his followers, the Hussites, kept copying his works in secret, and within a century, his ideas helped fuel the Reformation. The book became more famous than the punishment. 16. Thomas Münzer's pamphlets in 1525 caused the kind of political panic that made German princes lose sleep. This radical preacher published writings calling for sweeping religious and social change, and they spread across the countryside faster than gossip at a village well. Authorities were so alarmed by the ideas inside that owning his pamphlets in your barn could mark you as a dangerous troublemaker. Princes treated a few sheets of printed paper like a genuine threat to the entire social order. Proving just how much fear he caused, his writings stayed officially forbidden in parts of Germany for centuries afterward. One stack of pamphlets managed to terrify the most powerful people in the land. That is the power of really aggressive paragraphs. 17. Buddhist sutras hidden in cave libraries became one of the greatest book preservation miracles in human history. During the Huichang persecution in China around 845 AD, Emperor Wuzong ordered tens of thousands of Buddhist manuscripts destroyed, temples closed, and monks sent back to civilian life. Readers caught hiding sutras risked severe punishment or forced removal, so monks did the most genius thing imaginable. They sealed entire libraries inside caves at places like Dunhuang and walled them up, hoping someone would find them later. Centuries later, scholars rediscovered those hidden stashes still perfectly preserved by desert dryness. The monks invented geological book preservation just to spite the emperor. 18. Étienne Dolet's French translation of Plato in the 1540s contained a phrase that became the final proof his enemies needed. The Parisian printer had added a few words about the soul's fate after death that hinted at doubt about immortality. The Sorbonne theologians, who already disliked him, treated those words like a personal attack and used them as ammunition in heresy charges. Dolet was condemned in 1546 as a relapsed heretic, and his translations were banned across France. Imagine having your entire career and reputation undone by an editorial flourish so small you could miss it on a quick reread. That is the most extreme negative book review ever recorded. 19. The fortress of Montségur in 1244 became the setting for one of history's most enduring forbidden book mysteries. According to legend, the night before the fortress was surrendered, 4 Cathar perfects slipped down a sheer cliff face in complete darkness, carrying the most precious forbidden manuscripts in their entire religious tradition. What was written in those books? Nobody knows. Where did they end up? Still nobody knows. The story has obsessed historians, novelists, and treasure hunters for nearly 800 years. People have searched caves, decoded local legends, and combed the Pyrenees looking for that lost library. It remains one of the great unsolved riddles of medieval Europe, all built around a handful of books that vanished into the night. 20. Edmund Campion ran an underground Catholic book smuggling operation in Elizabethan England in 1580, sneaking theology books inside wine barrels, behind false walls, and even sewn into priest robes. The man was basically a one-priest literary import business in a country where Catholic books were full-on contraband. When authorities caught him in 1581, he became one of Elizabethan England's most famous Catholic martyrs. Wealthy English Catholic families built secret chambers in their manor houses, called priest holes, specifically to stash forbidden books and the occasional Jesuit. Some of those hiding spots weren't rediscovered until the 20th century, complete with original 16th century pamphlets still tucked safely inside. The most committed reading club in history? No contest. 21. Hebrew printing presses in 16th century Venice became weirdly stressful places to work because every page risked drawing inquisitorial attention. After Pope Julius III's crackdown in 1553, Jewish printers faced extreme censorship, and Christian censors were assigned to physically cross out forbidden passages in Talmud copies word by word. Some censors did such a thorough hatchet job that entire pages were left mostly black with crossed-out lines. Printers who tried to sneak uncensored copies past inspectors faced ruin and exile. Thanks to this extreme censorship, modern scholars now study those exact censored pages to figure out which passages medieval Christians found most offensive. The censors accidentally created a roadmap to the spiciest content. 22. Marguerite Porete wrote The Mirror of Simple Souls in 1290s France, a gorgeous mystical book about loving God so completely that the soul basically dissolves into divine love. The Bishop of Cambrai banned it and made her watch a copy destroyed in the town square. Marguerite's response was to keep writing, keep distributing, and keep handing copies to anyone curious. In 1310, she became one of the earliest known authors condemned over a single mystical book. In the ultimate historical irony, her writing was so beautiful that monasteries kept secretly copying it anonymously for centuries, thinking it was perfectly orthodox theology. The church accidentally became her biggest publisher. The book outlived everyone who tried to silence it. 23. Savonarola, the fiery preacher of late 15th century Florence, organized one of history's most theatrical censorship spectacles in 1497. Citizens were pressured to give up poetry, classical manuscripts, romance stories, cosmetics, artwork, and anything else reformers considered morally suspicious. Owning the wrong kind of book afterward could bring investigations, fines, or public shame. Things backfired spectacularly when, just 1 year later, Florence turned on Savonarola, and his own campaign became a cautionary tale about censorship moving faster than the censor can control. Renaissance Italy really said, "Congratulations, you played yourself." 24. Guillaume Postel's wild 16th century writings about a universal religion combining Christianity, Judaism, and Islam landed the French scholar in serious trouble across Catholic Europe. He wrote books predicting a coming spiritual age, identifying mysterious female prophets, and proposing theological mashups that made every authority twitch. His works were banned, confiscated, and added to forbidden indexes faster than he could print them. Authorities eventually declared him not heretical, but insane, which was apparently the polite 16th century version of cancellation. He spent his final years confined to a monastery while his books circulated illegally across Europe. Getting declared too weird to punish is a genuinely unique historical achievement. 25. Aretino's sonnets in mid-16th century Italy became some of the most aggressively forbidden literature ever printed because they were paired with extremely scandalous engravings. The Vatican disliked Pietro Aretino's witty, satirical verses so much that authorities tried to make the whole book disappear from respectable shelves. Owning a copy in papal territories meant immediate trouble with church courts. Yet the sonnets kept getting reprinted in secret presses across Europe for centuries. Wealthy collectors hid copies inside hollowed-out theology books because nothing fools an inspector like a fake cover labeled St. Augustine. The book outlasted multiple popes determined to erase it. Stubborn literature wins again. 26. Boccaccio's Decameron, written in the 1350s, became the surprise target of religious censors centuries after its author was gone. The cheeky collection of 100 Italian stories featured corrupt priests, clever nuns, and the most chaotic medieval love triangles imaginable. By the 1500s, the Inquisition decided enough was enough and ordered heavily censored versions where naughty clergy magically became merchants and judges. Readers caught with original uncensored copies in strict Catholic regions faced confiscation and questioning. Because of this massive editing job, modern editions now have to compare several censored versions to figure out what Boccaccio actually wrote. The censors accidentally created the most confusing literary detective puzzle ever. 27. Bohemian Brethren prayer books in the 17th century became contraband across Habsburg lands after the Protestant defeat at White Mountain in 1620. Czech families who refused to abandon their traditions hid these forbidden books inside hollowed-out beams, beneath bread ovens, and inside woven baskets disguised as kitchen storage. Generations of secret Protestants kept the tradition alive by reading aloud in tiny groups, swapping copies after dark, and memorizing entire prayers. Incredibly, when religious freedom finally returned over a century later, families opened the walls of old houses and pulled out perfectly preserved prayer books, still smelling faintly of bread. The bake oven library survived everything. 28. Conrad of Marburg, a 13th century papal inquisitor in Germany, became famous for hunting forbidden books with absolutely zero subtlety. He swept through towns demanding suspect manuscripts, interrogating readers, and treating thin evidence like a signed confession. Owning the wrong commentary on scripture in his territory could make an ordinary household feel radioactive. But his methods became so extreme that even other churchmen began quietly backing away from him. Conrad became a cautionary tale about what happens when book policing turns into paranoia with paperwork. Medieval bureaucracy had many problems, but this man somehow made all of them louder. 29. Almohad rulers in 12th century Spain banned a startling range of philosophical books, including works by Jewish and Muslim thinkers who disagreed with the dynasty's strict religious vision. Maimonides, one of history's greatest Jewish philosophers, fled with his family while preserving the manuscripts that mattered most. His Guide for the Perplexed later sparked controversy inside Jewish communities too, because some rabbis found his rational theology far too bold. Imagine being so brilliant that two completely different religious worlds argued over your books across 2 different centuries. Maimonides achieved the rare double cancellation, and his writings still outlived every single ban. The man simply could not be silenced. 30. Marjorie Kempe, an early 15th century English mystic, dictated her spiritual autobiography to a scribe and immediately landed on suspicion lists across England. Church authorities found her visions, public weeping, and tendency to lecture priests deeply alarming. She was repeatedly questioned about whether her words contained Lollard ideas, and her manuscript existed in a world where mystical voices were easily suspected. Then the book vanished for nearly 500 years. In 1934, a random English family discovered the only surviving copy in their country house, casually sitting next to recipe books. The earliest known autobiography in English had been hiding in plain sight, mistaken for ordinary household reading. Forgotten masterpiece status, unlocked. 31. Pelagius, a 5th century British theologian, wrote books arguing that humans could choose goodness through free will rather than relying on divine grace alone. St. Augustine was not amused, and the Church eventually declared Pelagius's writings unacceptable. Possessing his books could bring serious religious consequences, yet his ideas kept reappearing in surprising places across medieval Europe. They showed up inside other authors' works, in paraphrased margin notes, and in quiet copies made by monks who pretended not to recognize the source. Pelagius spent the entire Middle Ages haunting theological libraries like the world's most polite literary ghost. banned in person, immortal in footnotes. The man's books refused to take the hint. 32. Frederick II, the 13th century Holy Roman Emperor, collected suspicious books like trading cards and gleefully read them in front of horrified clergy. He owned Arabic philosophy, Aristotle in controversial translations, astrological treatises, and theological works that made church officials deeply uncomfortable. Owning such books made any ordinary subject look extremely suspicious, but Frederick was an emperor, so he just smirked and kept reading. His reading habits did not exactly help his already terrible relationship with the papacy. Frederick's response was to commission even more translations and host scholarly debates in his Sicilian court. He basically ran the medieval era's most exclusive forbidden book club, and the membership card was wearing a crown. 33. Cathar trial records from the early 1300s reveal how strange forbidden book paranoia could become. Inquisitors in southern France were sometimes so nervous about suspicious texts that simply having a literate cousin could land you in questioning. This paranoia reached peak absurdity when you realize many accused villagers could not actually read. The books were considered dangerous even by proximity, like literary radioactive material. Trial transcripts now read like surreal comedy, where investigators demand details about manuscripts the witnesses had only heard whispered about. The historical lesson? Medieval book panic did not always require a book. Sometimes a rumor about a book was enough to start the paperwork. 34. Pomponius Latus, a 15th century Roman humanist, ran an underground academy where members studied classical pagan literature with suspicious enthusiasm. They wore togas, adopted Latin names, and read ancient authors with the energy of people who had made Cicero their entire personality. Pope Paul II decided this looked dangerously like a conspiracy and had members arrested in 1468. The investigation found mostly enthusiastic nerds quoting Latin at each other, but the books were still confiscated and the academy disbanded. Luckily for them, years later, a different pope quietly let everyone resume their classical reading habits. The Vatican basically had a brief panic about ancient Romans, then chilled out and went back to commissioning Renaissance art. 35. Hildegard of Bingen wrote visionary theological books in the 12th century that were sometimes treated as daring and sometimes celebrated, depending entirely on which bishop was reading them that month. Her writings on cosmology, medicine, music, and divine visions made some authorities nervous, but her intelligence was impossible to ignore. She kept producing manuscripts, songs, letters, and even an entire morality play. Even more impressive is that Hildegard often defended her work by writing letters so eloquent that powerful men simply backed down. She was the medieval era's most successful one-woman publishing defense team. Imagine arguing your way out of a book ban using only your own writing skills. Iconic move. 36. Pierre Abelard, the brilliant and controversial 12th century French philosopher, watched his book Theologia formally rejected at the Council of Soissons in 1121. His arguments were considered too bold, too logical, and far too comfortable asking difficult questions about theology. But Abelard had one advantage censors could not control: students. They kept copying his lectures, carrying his ideas across France, and quoting him in university debates for centuries. The authorities tried to close the book on Abelard. His students turned it into a syllabus. His banned arguments basically became part of the foundation of medieval scholastic philosophy, which is the academic version of winning the argument very, very slowly. 37. Books on alchemy. In 14th century Europe occupied a strange legal gray zone where owning them could either make you fascinating or get you investigated by people with extremely serious robes. Pope John XXII issued a decree against fraudulent alchemy, and suddenly, alchemical manuscripts looked much riskier to own. Alchemists responded by hiding their notes inside elaborate codes, strange diagrams, and recipes that looked like nonsense to outsiders. History proved them wrong, as many of these suspicious alchemy books contained early chemistry experiments that influenced real science centuries later. The church worried about medieval mystery notebooks, and future science quietly took notes. Nobel Prize energy, hidden in coded margins. 38. Vendelmoot Kleisdochter, a Dutch widow in 1527, became one of the earliest women in the Netherlands remembered for refusing to abandon forbidden Lutheran books. She owned German pamphlets, discussed them with neighbors, and would not stop reading them despite repeated official warnings. Her trial in The Hague made her a symbol of Protestant determination across the Low Countries. Her story spread through underground networks, inspiring other readers to protect their books even when authorities came knocking. A Dutch widow with a stack of pamphlets ended up shaking the entire region's religious establishment. Never underestimate a determined reader with strong opinions and very portable literature. 39. Mongol-era Persia. In the 13th century, saw a surprising reversal of literary fortune when new rulers protected scientific and philosophical books that earlier regimes had treated with suspicion. Scholars who had hidden manuscripts of Avicenna, Al-Farabi, and other controversial thinkers suddenly found themselves welcomed at the court connected to Nasir al-Din al-Tusi's massive Maragay observatory. Books carried across deserts for generations were now openly studied and copied. Unfortunately, the Golden Age did not last, and when later dynasties returned to stricter policies, some of those same books had to be hidden all over again. Persian intellectual history basically operated on an exhausting cycle of bury, recover, bury, recover. The librarians needed vacation days. 40. Anabaptist hymnals in 16th century Germany became some of the most stubborn forbidden books in religious history. Authorities across Catholic and mainstream Protestant regions agreed on almost nothing except that Anabaptist songs and prayer collections had to go. Followers responded by composing new hymns in confinement, memorizing verses, and circulating handwritten copies inside ordinary-looking notebooks. The Ausbund hymnal, compiled around 1564, is still sung by Amish communities today, making it one of the oldest continuously used hymn books in Christian history. A forbidden songbook outlived every official who tried to suppress it. The Harmony won. 41. Castellios Concerning Heretics, published anonymously in 1554, was one of the boldest books of its century because it argued that punishing people over religious disagreement was wrong. Sebastian Castellio wrote it after the Servetus affair in Geneva, and both Catholic and Protestant authorities found the argument deeply uncomfortable. The book was banned, searched for, and quietly passed from reader to reader for generations. Over time, it helped shape Enlightenment ideas about religious tolerance. A forbidden pamphlet about not banning people became one of the most important arguments against censorship ever written. The irony was so strong it practically needed its own printing press. 42. Talmudic commentaries reached the absurd peak of their forbidden status in 1559 when Pope Paul IV added the Talmud and related literature to the Index. Italian Jewish communities had to hand over family heirloom manuscripts, some passed down for centuries. Yet rabbis came up with the cleverest workaround imaginable. They simply renamed the books. The Talmud became Shahs. Individual tractates got new titles, and inspectors who could not read Hebrew often missed the relabeled volumes entirely. An entire religious literature survived through aggressive rebranding. 16th century rabbis basically invented stealth marketing centuries before anyone needed a degree in it. 43. Books written by women mystics in late medieval Europe faced extra suspicion because authorities deeply distrusted female theological voices. Mechthild of Magdeburg, a 13th century German mystic, wrote a stunning book called The Flowing Light of the Godhead, and her work survived only because determined readers kept protecting it. Her allies in the Dominican order copied, translated, and preserved the text when it might otherwise have disappeared. Many other women's writings were not preserved so carefully, which means entire libraries of female thought may have slipped out of history without a trace. The books that survived did so because someone decided they were worth the risk. Allyship Medieval Edition. 44. Books printed in Russian during the early reforms of Peter the Great occasionally landed publishers in deep trouble when they criticized modernization policies. Old Believers, who rejected the religious reforms of the 1660s, secretly printed and circulated forbidden devotional texts using underground presses hidden in remote villages and northern forests. These communities preserved an entire alternative religious literature against decades of official suppression, with manuscripts traveling along trade routes inside salt barrels and grain sacks. As a completely unintended consequence, some Old Believer texts from this period are now treasured by historians as rare records of pre-Reform Slavic religious tradition. The forbidden version became the historical original. 44 jaw-dropping stories of forbidden books that powerful people tried to erase and somehow lost the fight to ink and stubborn readers. Now here is the question that should bother you all night. Out of every authority in this video, which one would you secretly hire today if you needed to make a book disappear forever? And be honest about why you picked them. No vague answers. Name your medieval censor and explain the dark logic. The comment section is officially open for some morally questionable confessions. And if this video survived your full attention without earning a like and a subscribe, you might be a tougher censor than anyone on the list. Fix that. The next forbidden chapter is already loading.